Times said that over 25,000 separate interviews and re-interviews had been conducted by agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and that the result, this 888-page document, is unmatched in the annals of fact-finding. President Johnson, of course, when he received this document from the chairman of the commission, made precisely the same point in a national network television broadcast in a somewhat less sophisticated fashion. Holding the document in one hand, he said, "It's very heavy," which indeed it is, and history may record that comment as the finest short analysis of the Commission report. For although it is 888 pages, and now that 26 volumes have been released by the Commission, of some of the testimony taken before them, or of course all of the testimony has not been released, crucial and critical areas, the Commission states, have not been released and will not be released at the present time, but have been locked in the National Archives under lock and key to be seen by some future generation of Americans. Nevertheless, we now have some of the basic work which appeared before the Commission. The Commission was most selective in determining who it would permit to testify. For example, you may recall reading of the first eyewitness to the assassination who received great coverage by the media. Her name is Mrs. Mary Mormon. She was standing alongside of the presidential limousine when the first shots were fired. She heard Jacqueline Kennedy speak to her wounded husband. The New York Times reported that Mary Mormon was a key witness. Mary Mormon was secured by CBS on the very day that the Commission reported. On the day that it was released, CBS had a nationwide network television broadcast called The 26 Witnesses Before the Warren Commission, and there was Mary Mormon speaking to the American people about that which she had seen on November 22nd in Dallas. Technically, however, she should not have been classified by the CBS network as one of the 26 witnesses before the Commission who they presented, because she never testified before the Commission. She never testified before the Commission because the Commission never called her, although she was discovered by all the media in America on the day of the assassination and by CBS the day the report was released. Perhaps the most revealing portion of the Commission report is Appendix number 5, the list of witnesses, starting on page 483. If you do not have a copy of the Warren Commission report, let me urge you to purchase one and to read it cover to cover, for it is one of the most important and remarkable documents ever produced by the United States government during our lifetime. And its most revealing aspect, perhaps, is the list of witnesses, or enlisting the 552 witnesses who testified, or from whom they took statements, or from whom they secured affidavits or depositions. One discovers that the most important witnesses to the assassination of President Kennedy were never permitted to testify before the Commission, and the most important witnesses to the murder of Patrolman Tippit were not permitted before the Commission. There were, for example, this is a rough approximation of the scene in Dallas. This is the book depository building, and that jagged line here indicates, near the semicircle, indicates a wooden fence high on a grassy knoll alongside of a concrete ornamental facade. Standing on that grassy knoll were 4 women. One of them was a staff writer for the Dallas Morning News. They said, "We heard the shots." They wrote an article which appeared in the Dallas Morning News on November 23rd. They were standing as close to the wooden fence in terms of being in front of it as almost anyone else that day when the shots were fired, and they said, "We heard the shots. They all came from behind us, from behind that wooden fence, and a little to our right." It was a horrible, ear-shattering sound. They wrote that article in the Dallas Morning News on November 23rd. It was published. The Warren Commission never called the author of that article Mary Woodward, nor did they call her 3 colleagues who she identified by name as standing alongside of her and all agreeing that the shots came from behind the wooden fence. Standing in front of the book depository building was the vice president of that firm, O.V. Campbell, who has been quoted extensively as saying, he said to our investigators and he said to newspapers and was so published in every major newspaper in America, he said this on television and radio as well at the time, I was standing under the very window where they say Oswald poked the rifle out and fired, but it's not true because the shots did not come from our building at all. I heard the shots, he said, they came from behind that wooden fence on the grassy knoll, and so I ran there to see if I could find the snipers who shot at our president. Well, the commission did stumble across a batch of witnesses who testified that the shots came from behind the wooden fence. They could not help that, because in calling anyone who had any relationship with the assassination in terms of what they viewed any aspect of it, they all testified as to where they thought the shots came from, and the vast majority of witnesses before the commission, even those who they called after being quite selective in determining who to call, the vast majority of eyewitnesses all agreed that the shots came from behind that wooden fence. But if you read the Warren Commission report, you will have no inkling that there is such testimony adduced by the Commission. The Warren Commission report is, and this is a statement that I never made until having before me the 26 volumes which were just released by the government very recently. The Warren Commission report is a fraud from the first page to the last page. Nothing in the Warren Commission report in terms of its basic presentation of what took place in Dallas on November 22nd even slightly resembles the testimony which the Commission itself took. In every single area, the testimony proves that the conclusions reached by the Commission are contrary to the evidence which they secured. And the Commission reaches these conclusions only by suppressing the basic evidence in its report, by distorting other evidence, or by taking so completely out of context certain testimony as to render it totally inconsistent and in fact contradictory with the intention of the witness in each case. Now, there have been a number of problems confronting the Commission. First of all, there is the police officer who found the weapon on the 6th floor of the book depository building and said, the weapon I found, he said in the affidavit which he signed on November 23rd, the following day, the weapon which I found is a German Mauser 7.65 millimeters. Now, inasmuch as the Commission insists that the assassination weapon is an Italian carbine caliber 6.5, it raises some basic questions. The District Attorney of Dallas for more than 24 hours insisted that the weapon which they had, which had been found by Officer Weitzman on the 6th floor, right at that window where Oswald allegedly fired from, was in fact a German Mauser 7.65 millimeters, and it was not until the following day when the FBI issued its first public statement that Oswald had purchased a rifle in March of 1963, that it was an Italian carbine caliber 6.5, that Mr. Wade, the Dallas District Attorney, jumped in front of the first live television camera he could find in Dallas to indicate that a miracle had taken place in that holy city of Dallas overnight, that the rifle had been transformed both in terms of its nationality and its size. And by November 23rd, it was no longer German, it was Italian, it was no longer a Mauser, it was now a carbine, it was no longer caliber 7.65, but 6.5. When I testified before the Commission, I asked if I might see the alleged murder weapon, and I picked it up, and it said on it, in large, clear letters, "Made in Italy, caliber 6.5. How then could an officer sign an affidavit describing it as an entirely different weapon? Well, one of the members of the Commission, Gerald R. Ford, sold an article to Life magazine, which they published on October 6th of this year, in which he sought to deal with this discrepancy. Congressman Ford said, The reason it was called a Mauser is that there was a reporter who was facing an immediate deadline, and he asked an officer standing nearby what he thought the rifle might be, and he said it might be a German Mauser. That explanation by Congressman Ford is a false explanation. Congressman Ford, a member of the Warren Commission, knew that that explanation was false. That is, he did if he read the Warren Commission report, which he signed. For it was not an officer who tossed out a guess to a reporter facing an immediate deadline at that moment, but it was the officer who 24 hours thereafter signed an affidavit, the only officer in Dallas to sign an affidavit identifying the weapon, who identified it as a German Mauser. Well, if you read the Commission report, the officer Seymour Weitzman appears to be some kind of a boob who doesn't really know anything at all about rifles. But if you read Deputy Constable Weitzman's testimony, Volume 7, beginning on page 105, you will find that he is a rather unusual Dallas police officer. He is, first of all, a graduate engineer. He is, secondly, a man who owned a sporting goods shop and sold rifles over a period of time. And he is further a man who stands by his original identification of the weapon, and none of that is obvious or apparent from the statements in the Commission report. Beyond that, Constable Weitzman, since he was brought there about the rifle, decided he wanted to blurt out some more information, which the Commission attorney of this city, Joseph Ball, seemed reluctant to accept. Weitzman said, "When I heard the shots, I ran from Maine and Houston up that grassy knoll, and I climbed over the fence toward where the shots came from. When I got there," he said, "it was overcome with Dallas police officers, Secret Service agents, and FBI agents, all of whom were back there looking for the assassins." And he said, "I found a railroad yardman back there, and I asked him if he knew where the shots came from. And he said, yes, they came from right back here. The noise came from the shrubbery right at the fence." And then Weitzman said, "I asked him if he saw anything back there, and he said, yes, just after the shots were fired at the president, quote, I thought I saw somebody throw something into the bushes there," close quote. Well, you would think that Mr. Ball, this distinguished attorney who was so deeply interested in securing the facts, would then say, what was the name of the railroad yardman? What did he look like? Give us his identification. We want to call this man who may turn out to be the most important witness in the case. But as soon as Deputy Constable Weitzman said he heard the shots come from there and said he saw someone throw something into the bushes, this is the next statement made by Mr. Ball. I think that is all. That is enough testimony, and that was the end of Seymour Weitzman's testimony before the Warren Commission. And page after page after page of the 26 volumes reveals a similar interest on behalf of the members of the Commission and those who function as counsel for the Commission to secure all of the facts. If the shots came from the area near that triple overpass high up on the grassy knoll, and this is the testimony before the Commission, not only did the majority of the persons say that the shots came from there according to their hearing, 3 witnesses testified, including one who was standing on the overpass, that he saw smoke come, wisps of smoke come from behind the bushes, just as the shots were fired. S.M. Holland, standing over there, a railroad supervisor, said, I heard the shots come and I saw whiffs of smoke come from behind the trees and bushes. 3 persons testified they saw smoke, in addition to the scores who said the shots came from there. And 2 testified that as soon as they arrived on the scene, they smelled gunpowder behind that wooden fence. And Senator Ralph Yarborough, who was in the motorcade, said as he drove past that spot, he smelled gunpowder, and he so stated to the Commission. The commission states, quote, "There is no credible evidence whatsoever to indicate that the shots came from anywhere other than the book depository building." That is the commission's conclusion, without in their report presenting the testimony of a single person of the majority who said the shots came from behind the wooden fence. Well, one can tell by examining the wounds, can one not, where the shots came from, if you know when the shots were fired and where the limousine was in the direction the president was facing when the shots were fired. So let's start that way. November 22nd, after the president died, a press conference was held in the Parkland Memorial Hospital. Dr. Malcolm Perry, who performed the tracheotomy on the president's throat, said, "The wound in the president's throat was an entrance wound. The bullet entered from the front and ranged downward into the chest." Dr. Kemp Clark, the physician who pronounced the president dead, said the wound at the throat was an entrance wound. It entered at the throat, ranged downward into the chest, and did not exit. And Dr. Robert N. McClelland, senior physician at the hospital, said at press conferences carried live on television and radio, published in the press the following day, said, "You know, down here in Dallas, we have an opportunity to examine bullet wounds every single day. But as a result, we know the difference between entrance wounds and exit wounds, and the wound in the president's throat certainly appeared to be an entrance wound." Well, armed with the information that the president was shot from the front and from above, and armed with the preconceived verdict that Oswald was on the 6th floor of the book depository building and therefore was the lone assassin, the FBI and the Dallas police said the limousine was there, facing the book depository building, and Oswald fired down. Now, the problem with that story is that it is totally false. That's one of the problems. The most serious problem is that it is demonstrably false. But at that time, Henry Wade, the Dallas district attorney, during the first week when the FBI, Secret Service, and Dallas police insisted that the limousine was there, when the New York Times quoted those authorities as saying Oswald fired out of the book depository building as the car came up on Houston Street, swung his rifle in an arc of almost 180 degrees, and then fired down Elm, and then fired again down Elm. At that time, District Attorney Henry Wade said, "We have found in Oswald's possession a map of the book depository building and the whole area. Oswald circled the book depository building and drew a dotted line down Houston Street in his own handwriting, showing the trajectory which he had planned." The problem with the story that the car was on Houston Street is that there are a number of distinguished witnesses who say it is not true, that the car in fact was there on Elm Street before the first shot was fired. Among those witnesses are Jacqueline Kennedy, Governor Connolly, Mrs. Connolly, and the films that were taken at the time showing that the car was there on Elm Street. Well, the FBI and the Dallas police are nothing in this case if not flexible. And therefore, the car was placed on Elm Street where it actually was when the shots were fired, and now we're taking the second approach of the government to how it was accomplished. Placing the car on Elm Street where it actually was when the first shot was fired, however, poses two new additional problems. Number one, what about the map where Oswald had drawn the dotted line showing he planned to fire down Houston Street? New York Times, November 27th, 1963. The Dallas authorities said today there never was any such map. Any reference to it was a mistake. Close quote. That takes care of the map. However, there is another problem. How did Oswald shoot the president from the front, from the back? The autopsy was performed at the Bethesda, Maryland hospital by a Marine commander, Dr. J.J. Humes. Was performed from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. on November 22nd. The results were made available in progress to agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and as soon as it was concluded, according to the Warren Commission report. 13 days thereafter, after the government had the autopsy report, they reenacted the crime, published the reenactment of the crime, the full story about it, published in the New York Times, December 6th, by Times reporters who watched the reenactment in the Times said at that time the most serious problem confronting the authorities is how Oswald shot the president in the front of the throat when he was behind him. But, said the New York Times, the way that is being resolved is that the Secret Service agents and agents of the FBI who are reenacting the crime, as the car passes the area, turn completely to the rear, exposing their throat to the book depository building, and thus explain in that fashion the president had turned completely around, and therefore Oswald was able to fire a bullet in the front of his throat. Fortunately, however, for that story, a man by the name of Abraham Zabruta, who was there on that grassy knoll, who testified before the commission that the shots came from over his head, from behind the wooden fence, although that testimony, of course, is not presented by the commission in the report. He stated that he had taken motion picture films, of course, which we've all seen, published in Life magazine, stills of them. And those films show that the president was looking to the front and half right, directly at the wooden fence when the first bullet entered his throat. But, said the New York Times on December 6th, the autopsy report, the preliminary working notes, the work products of what Dr. J.J. Humes did on November 22nd will be the best answer to the angle of entry of the bullet. And the Warren Commission report was published, and there is no document in there purporting to be any of the preliminary working papers of Dr. Humes. And finally, the 26 volumes were published, and now we have reference for the first time to the preliminary working papers, the vital documents owned by the people of the United States of America, for they were drawn up by a Marine commander working in an official capacity. And now we're going to find out something about those vital preliminary working papers. Here they are. Volume 17, page 48 of the Warren Commission report, Commission Exhibit number 397, on the stationer of the United States Naval Medical School, National Naval Medical Center, Bethesda, Maryland, 24th of November, 1963, certificate. I, J. James Humes, certified that I have destroyed by burning certain preliminary draft notes relating to the autopsy I conducted on President Kennedy. Well, Dr. Humes appeared before the commission, and do you think the first question would be, Dr. Humes, why did you burn all those important papers? Well, that was not the first question, nor the last, nor any in between. Dr. Humes was never asked that question when he testified before the commission, almost as if the members of the commission understood. Dr. Humes said, however, that in order to make it possible for you, when he testified before the commission, for you members of the commission to see pictures of the wounds, I have had drawn pictures of the president showing where the wounds were. And he said, you know, photographs and x-rays were taken of the president's body when the autopsy was performed. That is a routine matter. He said in cases of violent death, it is always done, and those photographs and x-rays are valuable to us in making a determination as to the direction, cause of death, direction of the wounds or missiles. He said, however, in this case, before those photographs and x-rays were developed, they were taken from us at the hospital by agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Dr. Humes never was permitted to see the photographs of the x-rays, which were taken ostensibly for his benefit, so that he could prepare an autopsy report. And Dr. Humes said, I did not know whether or not those photographs or those x-rays would be available to you members of the commission. So we had an artist draw a picture, and we dictated to him from our verbal recollection of what took place. We told him what we recalled. And the only exhibits before the commission which pictorially depict the wounds are the drawings of an artist based upon the recollection of the doctor. And Humes said, it is unfortunate, but we did not have the photographs to show to the artist at that time. So the photographs, the preliminary drafts, the x-rays have all been suppressed by the commission. All Dr. Humes could say about the wound in the throat in terms of his examination of that wound is that it had been so altered by the tracheotomy performed by Dr. Perry that he, Humes, could not tell from an examination of the wound of the throat whether it was an entrance wound or an exit wound. He would have to rely, he said, upon Dr. Perry. Dr. Perry had already said the wound in the throat was an entrance wound. The commission takes all this information and comes out with the flat assertion that the wound in the throat was clearly an exit wound, that Oswald fired it, and Oswald was behind the president, and the bullet exited at the throat. Well, you know, Mark Twain once said, "Whoso hanging from a rope by his hands severeth it above his hands shall fall. It being no defense," he said, "that the rest of the rope is sound." And so in this case, if the rifle is not capable of the performance which it allegedly gave in Oswald's hand on November 22nd, that is 3 shots in a period of approximately 6 seconds, at least 2 of which hit in that period of time, if that was not accomplished, if that could not be accomplished by the weapon, then there is no case against Oswald, obviously, as the lone assassin. That weapon in the hands of the world's greatest rifle shot is not capable of that performance. That statement has been made by the world's greatest rifle shot. His name is Hubert Hammer. He's the Olympic champion freestyle with a weapon, the rifle. He said it is an inaccurate weapon, it is a slow weapon, and I could not do what Oswald allegedly did with the weapon on November 22nd. Well, let's see how the commission is going to test the weapon. We suggested to them, it's an obvious challenge, that they take 100 members of the United States Marine Corps, each of whom fired better than Oswald when Oswald fired for score in the Marine Corps, even considerably better. Put them up on the 6th floor of the book depository building, have a radio-controlled car driven by, and in turn let them each fire 3 shots at this car, which has sandbag dummies in the seats which had previously been occupied by the president, by the governor. And if one of them can fire 2 out of 3 accurate shots, if one of the 100 can do it, we will concede, as all reasonable persons must, that it proves it is possible. It proves that the weapon is capable, if even 1 out of 100. If just 1 out of 100 did it, there still is a question of how likely it is, perhaps, but it certainly proves it is possible. The commission rejected that challenge and decided to undertake a different test entirely. First, the commission decided to escalate Oswald's ability with a weapon. He was a rather poor shot, and the commission, after his death, decided to award him the merit of becoming an excellent shot. They did it in this fashion. Oswald fired for score twice. The second and last time he fired for score in the Marine Corps, he fired 191. That is 1 point above the minimum qualifying score for the armed services, 1 point above the minimum. The United States Marine Corps classifies such a performance as a person who participated in it as being, quote, a poor shot, a poor shot. However, the commission decided to accept a different standard entirely, and they secured a Marine Corps Major, Major Anderson, and this is his testimony. As compared to a civilian who had not received rifle training at all, Oswald would be considered a good to excellent shot. As compared to the entire American population, Oswald would be considered to be a good to excellent shot. Probably, we have not studied the statistics involved. It may be that they are quite accurate in that regard. The entire American population includes 2-year-old children, 98-year-old grandmothers, and the vast majority of people in this country who have never held a rifle in their hands. However, when compared to those who have gone through the armed services and have had minimum training with a weapon, Oswald is a poor shot, was a poor shot, and the commission seeks to escalate his ability in this fashion, which I think one can safely say is a dishonest exercise on their behalf. Well, now that we have Oswald as a good to excellent shot, the commission decides to secure the services of 3 men to test the weapon. They secured 3 masters, certified as masters by the National Rifle Association, without feeling it important to tell us in the report that master qualification is the highest international qualification in terms of rifle expertise, and that there are very few American masters with a weapon. They secured 3 of the best rifle shots in America. And then they said on page 193 of the report, we conducted a test which tested the weapon under conditions which simulated those which prevailed during the assassination. Oh yes, let's see how similar it is. It's not in the report, but when you read the testimony of the soldiers who participated in erecting the test and the FBI agents who participated, you see that this is what they did. They erected a tower 30 feet high. Oswald was allegedly 54 to 55 feet above the street level when he fired the shot, but they had a tower 30 feet high. It was built with a stool on the inside and a 2x4 board for a rest for the rifle, none of which was available, we're told, to Oswald. They permitted these experts to fire at 3 stationary targets, each of which was approximately twice the size of a target which would be available from one on the 6th floor of the book depository building if the president were sitting back against the seat as he was from an area just below his shoulders to the top of his head. The targets these 3 masters fired at were each at least twice as large as that target. And they were not moving targets. They were stationary targets. 3 separate stationary targets. And the commission states, quote, the marksmen took as much time as they wanted for the first target. As much time as they wanted. There are trees over there, and the commission reported that it was impossible to see the presidential limousine as it went beyond the trees until it passed the tree area from the book depository building, and the film show revealed, the commission report, that Oswald fired that first shot before the car had traveled for 0.8 of a second beyond the trees. In other words, Oswald had less than 0.8 of a second to fire the first shot. In this test, the marksmen are permitted all of the time they want for firing at the first large stationary target. The report shows that the marksmen missed, even under those circumstances, 5 of the total of 18 shots, which they attempted, all hitting the first target each time, 6 out of 6 shots. Let's remove that in terms of all the time that they had and deal with those where there was some rush, and even then they never really equaled Oswald's expertise or speed. But in terms of the 2 targets, which were not moving, but at least they had to move their rifles somewhat to fire at those stationary targets, they struck the targets 7 times. They missed the targets 5 times. And the commission says this test, which is comparable to the conditions which existed on November 22nd, proves that Oswald could and did fire as the commission alleges he did. That test is a fraudulent test. It is so totally unrelated to the conditions which allegedly existed on November 22nd to render it as totally useless, and for the commission to utilize it as proof that Oswald, in fact, was able to utilize the weapon in that fashion is to participate in deceit. Perhaps one of the most amazing aspects of the case deals with why Oswald was arrested in the first place, why his description was sent out. Oswald's description was dispatched as follows: a man who was slender, white, weighing 165 pounds and 5 feet 10 inches tall. It was sent out at 12:45 p.m. by the Dallas police 15 minutes after the assassination. The commission concedes that is so on page 144 of the report. When Oswald was arrested, it was said he was wanted for the murder of Officer Tippit. He was questioned about the murder of Officer Tippit. He was arrested for the murder of Officer Tippit. He was formally charged with the murder of Officer Tippit. He was not even charged with the murder of the president until the following day, very early in the morning, about 1 or 2 in the morning, the following day, many hours after he had been formally charged with the murder of Tippit. The reason for that, the district attorney told us, the chief of homicide told us, and the Dallas chief of police told us, was because he was not wanted, sought, nor arrested for the murder of the president, but solely for the murder of Tippit. So Oswald's description was sent out at 12:45 p.m. in connection with the murder of Officer Tippit, but Officer Tippit was not shot until 1:15 or 1:16 p.m. Oswald was wanted for the murder of Officer Tippit 30 to 31 minutes before Tippit was shot. That raises a substantial question. The commission has an obligation to determine on what basis Oswald's description was dispatched by the Dallas police. The commission concedes that it is unable to determine the basis on which that description was dispatched. Now, what do they mean by that? It was sent out by Dallas police. It means it was turned into the Dallas police over the Dallas police radio by an officer, and all they have to do is ask the Dallas police officers who were in the area where they got the description from and why they sent it out. But the commission confesses in this document, which we're told is the most massive detective job in the history of the world, the commission confesses it could not find out on what basis Oswald's description was dispatched at 12:45. The commission is willing to hazard a guess, however. For the commission hazards many a guess. The commission has, in fact, various areas of speculation contained in the report. There are scores of likelies, apparentlys, possiblys, probablys, and the highest order of speculation awarded by the commission to most important areas, and that is the most probably. This is a most probably situation. This description of a man who was 5'10", white, slender, 165 pounds, most probably was sent out because a man named Brennan most probably gave it to a Dallas police officer, page 144 of the report. Now, this is a concrete lined pool, and leaning up against the end of the concrete little wall is a man named Howard Brennan, who emerged rather late as a witness in this case and emerged as the most important witness when the commission finally issued its report. Mr. Brennan said, "I was standing there leaning up against this concrete wall, the film show, that he was looking in this direction. But he said, I heard 2 shots and I looked up at the 6th floor of the book depository building. There I saw a man standing with a rifle. I saw him aim and fire the 3rd shot, and then I saw him walk away from the window." And the commission says that is most probably how the description was given out. Now this raises a new problem. Since the window was half closed, and since Oswald was standing there firing out of the window, one would expect that since he fired through the window pane, the glass would probably be broken. However, it was not broken. Of the many miracles that took place in Dallas that day, that threatened to be the most remarkable of them all. But the commission resolved that by stating that Brennan was wrong. The man was not standing firing, he was kneeling and firing, therefore, through the open place, most probably. Here's this statement, page 144. Although Brennan testified that the man in the window was standing when he fired the shots, most probably he was either sitting or kneeling. Now we have it. There's Oswald up there. 107 feet away is Mr. Brennan. 6 stories beneath the place where Oswald is kneeling. Brennan glances up, sees a man who he swears is standing. Actually, he's mistaken the man is kneeling or sitting, but nevertheless, Brennan can give an absolutely accurate description of Oswald, including a description of his height. How does the commission handle that? They handle it with one pithy statement, quote, 145 of the report. Brennan could have seen enough of the body of a kneeling or squatting person to estimate his height. Close quote. Well, Brennan is taken to the Dallas police station to participate in a lineup to see if he can pick out the man. And there is Oswald in the lineup. Now, we know how the Dallas police lineups are conducted. We know because we read the testimony of William Whaley, who was a Dallas taxi driver who said, I was taken to the lineup. He said, you know, they said, did you identify Oswald? He said, I sure did. He said, you know, I could have identified Oswald with my eyes closed. The attorney said, literally with your eyes closed? And he said, yes. He said, well, how could you identify anyone in the lineup with your eyes closed? He said, he was there, he was standing on one side, handcuffed, wearing a white T-shirt, and there on the other side were, quote, 5 young teenagers, all handcuffed together, and there was Oswald saying, you call this a fair lineup? This is not a fair lineup. And so, Mr. Brennan is taken down to one of these lineups, and how does the Warren Commission conclude about the lineups? We conclude that the Dallas police lineups were conducted fairly. In the face of that testimony, that's their conclusion. Well, they take Brennan down to lineup. Page 145, Brennan was unable to make a positive identification of Oswald as the man who fired on November 22nd. He was unable to. But then he was questioned by the Dallas police and by the FBI, and after about 3 weeks passed by, Mr. Brennan was taken to the office of the FBI, and the commission states that on December 17th, Brennan then said he was then able to say the man who fired was Oswald. However, on January 7th, he went back to the FBI and said, I cannot say it was Oswald. The commission concludes on page 250 of its report, 105 pages after that explanation of what took place in the police lineup, and thereafter, quote, one witness, Howard L. Brennan, made a positive identification of Oswald as being the person at the window. That's the commission's conclusion. Reference to Mr. Brennan. Well, the question still remains as to why Oswald's description was dispatched and how it was dispatched, and if you are disinclined to believe that it was Brennan who, under those circumstances, was able to give such a description, then one must wonder why his description was dispatched in connection with the murder of an officer before the murder took place. Well, the commission takes the position that Oswald carried into the book depository building a rifle wrapped up in brown paper. In fact, the commission has a section that is known that Oswald allegedly said that he had curtain rods in that small, thin package, which the witnesses say he carried, and the commission deals with that under one heading and then deals with the package as they see it under another heading, and the subdivisions, I think, could be used as alternative titles for an Agatha Christie murder mystery. They're called, quote, the curtain rod story or the long and bulky package. First, let's deal with the curtain rod story. Curtain rod story says the commission started when Oswald asked Wesley Frazier to drive him, Oswald, back to his home in Irving, Texas, the day before the assassination. He said, there's some curtain rods I want to pick up. They're in the garage, and the curtain rods in my room here in Dallas are broken. Subsequent investigation by persons who went into Oswald's room discovered that the curtain rods in his room were in fact broken, although that information does not appear in the commission report. Following day, Oswald called for Wesley Frazier. Frazier testified before the commission, and Frazier's in Irving, Texas. Frazier's sister, Mrs. Randall, answered the door, and she saw Oswald with a package in his hand. He then took the package and put it in the car. Frazier came out and drove him to work. Mrs. Randall was called before the commission, and Mrs. Randall was shown a package which contained the disassembled rifle. Now, unfortunately, and here we digress for a moment to deal with what might be called the brown paper sack story. Unfortunately, the brown paper sack which Oswald allegedly carried the weapon in to the book depository building in and was placed alongside of the shells when the officers arrived there and found it, unfortunately that sack was destroyed by the FBI laboratory. The commission report says, unfortunately, because as they tested it to see the fabric that it was made of, etc., they destroyed it in terms of its value as evidence. But the FBI laboratory, the commission reports, was kind enough under those circumstances, to fabricate an entirely different brown paper bag, which they certify is very similar to the one which they found on the floor. And it is that fabricated paper bag which the commission records show was shown to the witnesses with the rifle disassembled and placed inside of it. Now, if that raises any question in your minds as to the origin of the original paper sack, let me add to them by telling you that the officer who found the shells on the 6th floor of the book depository building, and his name is Sergeant Gerald Lynn Hill of the Dallas Police Force, testified that he found the shells. Now remember, the bag is within 3 feet of those shells. And he said, I found the shells, but there was no bag there at all. He said, the only sack I saw there was a little lunch sack with chicken bones. If there was a larger bag up there on the 6th floor, if it was there, I did not see it. Close quote, volume 7, page 65 of Sergeant Hill's testimony. Now the brown paper little sack that had the chicken bones in it, you may recall that it was said originally that Oswald had a chicken lunch dined while awaiting the presidential limousine on November 22nd, finished the chicken lunch, put the bones in a bag, and left that behind, and Gordon Shanklin, the director of the FBI operation in Dallas, was quoted in the New York Times as saying, we have that bag and it has Oswald's fingerprints on it, and it's part of the important case against him. The man who ate the chicken for lunch is the assassin. Well, that was very disconcerting news for Bonnie Ray Williams, who came forward to say, you know, I ate that chicken yesterday, and those are the bones I put in the bag, and the bag is just where I left it, but I did not shoot the president. Well, then Oswald's fingerprints disappeared from the brown paper bag. And the commission concluded that, in fact, they were never there. The commission states, quote, Gordon Shanklin, director of the FBI in Dallas, Shanklin never said that Oswald's fingerprints were on the bag. But read the list of witnesses and you will see that Gordon Shanklin was never called, so he never told that to the commission. And the very reputable and responsible reporter for the New York Times who had the conversation with Shanklin and published that, he was never called. On what basis did the commission then conclude that Shanklin never told that to Fred Powledge of the New York Times? We do not know. Then we have Officer Hicks, who arrived on the scene for the purpose of taking pictures, of dusting for fingerprints, etc. And he said, and you can see all the pictures in the exhibits. In fact, in the commission report, there are pictures. There is the carton, there are the shells, there is the window, and there where the brown paper sack is supposed to be, there is a dotted line superimposed on the picture by the FBI saying, with an asterisk, this is where the brown paper sack was found. But there is no picture taken on November 22nd of that sack, and although every single bit of evidence was revealed by the FBI and by the Dallas police, and first and foremost by Henry Wade, the Dallas district attorney, who told everything that he had in the case, including that chicken bag with Oswald's fingerprints, he never mentioned the brown paper sack. The first time that was ever mentioned was on December 10th. From November 22nd to December 10th, it was never mentioned at all. So the bag came very late into being as evidence and disappeared very soon before a single witness could observe it. And that perhaps might be called the brown paper sack story. In any event, they have this new fabricated bag, which the laboratory was kind enough to prepare, and they placed the rifle in there, broken down, and Mrs. Randall looked at it, and she said, I told you definitely, as I told you definitely, it could not have been that long. The package Oswald carried was not that long. Well, then we have the testimony of Wesley Frazier. Now, Wesley Frazier, of course, Mrs. Randall's testimony appears on volume 2, page 248 of the commission hearing report. Now we have Wesley Frazier. Now, Wesley Frazier said, when he looked at the package, he said, no, it was not that long. It was only 2 feet long, and the one they showed him was over 3 feet long. He said, no, it was only 2 feet long. I'm sure of that. It was not that package at all. These are the only 2 people who saw Oswald with the package. These are the only 2. He went on to say, Oswald picked up the package when he was in the car as I drove him into the book depository building parking lot. He put the package, the bottom part of it, cupped into his right hand. He tucked the other part under his arm, and with it someplace under his armpit, he walked down the street. In fact, he said, when I was behind him, I could not even see the package. It was such a small, thin package, I could not even see it when I was behind him. Counsel for the commission, Mr. Ball, said, pick up the package and hold it the way Oswald did. He said, well, I can't. The package is too big. Well, try. And so he picked up the package and cupped the bottom of it into his right hand, and the top of it came up to the top of his ear. He was unable to tuck it under his arm. And he put it down and said, I'm sorry. Could not have been in there. Frazier, the testimony shows, is 6 feet 1 inch tall. Oswald was at least 3 inches shorter. I think one can conclude that very likely, if Frazier could not handle the package in that fashion, Oswald, who was shorter, very likely also could not handle the package in that fashion. Only one person saw Oswald enter the book depository building. Only one person. 2 saw him with the package, and 1 saw him enter the building, and the person who saw him enter the building is named Jack Doherty. And Mr. Doherty made this statement according to the commission. Let's first see what the commission said that he said, and then let us read his testimony and see how accurate the commission is in presenting the flavor of his testimony. Page 133 of the report, quote, one employee, Jack Doherty, believed that he saw Oswald coming to work, but he does not remember that Oswald had anything in his hands. Rather a vague description by Mr. Doherty. Let's see what Mr. Doherty really told the commission. Volume 6, page 376, question by Mr. Ball again. Did you see Oswald come to work that morning? Yes, when he first came into the door. Did he come in with anybody? No. Was he alone? Yes, he was alone. Do you recall him having anything in his hands? Well, I did not see anything if he did. Well, did you pay enough attention to him, you think, that you would remember whether he did or didn't? Well, I believe I can say, yes, sir. I will put it this way. I did not see anything in his hands at the time. In other words, your memory is definite on that, is it? Yes, sir. In other words, you would say positively he had nothing in his hands. I would say that, yes, sir. Volume 6, page 377. I suggest that the commission's presentation of that testimony that Doherty believed he saw Oswald coming to work but does not remember that he had anything in his hands hardly presents the positive assertions made by Mr. Doherty in reference to that area. But of course the commission throughout continually takes matters out of context, or in fact refuses to raise the important context which the testimony was adduced. Now let's take the murder of Patrolman Tippett. Only one person saw Tippett killed and was able to come forward and say that is the man who did it. Only 2 persons saw the murder according to the commission. One is Domingo Benavides, but he said I could not identify anyone. In fact, he was not even taken to the Dallas police lineup to examine Oswald or anyone else because he said he could make no identification. That leaves Helen Louise Markham. Now Mrs. Markham says that she saw the man do it. She was taken to the police station in a hysterical state. She passed out. She was taken to the Parkland Royal Hospital where she was unconscious, taken from there to the police lineup, and there she picked out the number 2 man. At that time they had reduced the lineup to 4, and that time thereafter Oswald was the number 2 man in every single police lineup held that day, which is generally not accepted procedure and practice. Now we have Mr. Ball again questioning Mrs. Markham, volume 3, page 310. Now you went into the room and you looked these people over, these 4 men? Yes, sir. Did you recognize anyone in the lineup? No, sir. You did not? Mr. Ball must have almost fallen off his chair at that point. Did you see anybody? I have asked you that question. Did you recognize anybody from their face? From their face? No. Did you identify anybody in these 4 people? I did not know anybody. I did not know nobody. It's a more positive assertion than the former. I know you didn't know anybody, but did anybody in that lineup look like anybody you had ever seen before? No. I had never seen none of them. None of these men. Not one of the four. Not one of them. Not one of all four? No, sir. And now, the magic question. Was there a number 2 man there? Yes, number 2 is the one I picked. How did you recognize him? When I saw this man, I was not sure. But then I had cold chills just run all over me. Sounds like a rather mystic identification. Or else someone was at her back with a cold steel revolver. The commission concludes that Helen Markham is a reliable witness, and she is the sole witness to the murder of Officer Tippit who can make an identification, and the whole case against Oswald as the murder of Tippit rests upon Mrs. Markham's identification. And the commission concludes that is sufficient evidence to prove that Oswald indeed shot Officer Tippit. Now, when I read in the newspapers that Mrs. Markham said that the man said originally to the reporters of the Dallas Morning News and everyone else that the man who shot Tippit, she saw him, he was short, he was stocky, he had bushy hair, realizing that Oswald was medium height or a little taller, almost painfully thin, with thin, light-colored hair that was receding, it seemed to me that there was a difference in the description of the 2 men. In fact, there could not have been a greater difference. And so I called Mrs. Markham and had a long conversation with her, identifying myself, saying who I was, and she said, the man who killed Officer Tippit was short. He was short, she said, no question, he was short. I said, how about his build? Was he a little on the heavy side? Well, a little, she said, not too heavy, but a little bit heavy. How about his hair? Was it bushy? It was somewhat bushy. She said it was somewhat bushy. Now, this totally confirms the statement of Sergeant Hill, who said that he heard the description of Oswald, or of the man sent out after the Tippit killing, and he heard the description of the police radio, and it said it was a man with brown, bushy hair. And he so testified before the commission. Hill said he drove up to the scene, and a man came up to him, an eyewitness, and said, I just saw the man who did it, 5'8", gave a description, and said he had brown, bushy hair. So Mrs. Markham's statement is totally consistent with that which the authorities were saying at the beginning. But we now have this statement, and we now publish it widely as we could in this country, where the media refuses to discuss or permit a dialogue regarding the assassination. But it was widely discussed abroad, where there is much more interest in the assassination displayed by the media than in our own country. And I testified before the commission exactly to what Mrs. Markham had told me regarding the description of the man that she had seen. And they called Mrs. Markham, and Mrs. Markham denied that she, as the commission report reveals, denied that she had ever made such a comment to me. And then she went a little further. She denied that she ever had talked to me at all. And so the Chief Justice called me back from London, where I was lecturing, and asked me to return. I came back, testify, and the Chief Justice called me back in order to say to the media through me, my presence, Mr. Lane, we have every reason to doubt the truthfulness of your statement. They believe Mrs. Markham, this excellent witness, but they would not believe me. And I said, well, I can understand you're taking the position that you don't know who to believe in a conflict, but to say that you've resolved it, you believe her and not me, to accuse me of committing perjury for the commission is a more extreme statement than any Chief Justice probably has ever taken in the history of the United States about an attorney's testimony before him. But that was the statement. And I said, if you feel that way, I ask you to take my testimony. Take Mrs. Markham's testimony. Submit it to the United States Attorney's Office and have us both prosecuted for perjury. And I will be happy to allow any American jury to determine which one of us is telling the truth. They said, you seem somewhat confident. I said, yes, I have a tape recording of that conversation. Well, the commission said, Let me tell you the law. It is against the law, first of all. I tell you parenthetically, it's against the law to make a recording without securing permission. I made it without securing permission, and to divulge it. It is not against the law to make it without permission. It is not against the law to divulge it without permission. It is against the law to make it and to divulge it. If the commission directed me to give them the recording, I would have given it to them, the divulgence would have been theirs, and no one would have committed a crime. But the commission refused to direct me to give them the recording. The commission said, will you give it to us voluntarily? I said, well, I can't under the circumstances. And they would not direct me to give it to them. And so they sent out a press release saying that Lane has this, but he refuses to give us the information. He says he has it, we don't even believe he has it. I went back to my office and I pondered that. I'm very concerned about not being prosecuted. Violation of a law, and I had not yet violated the law, but giving that recording to the commission would very likely be a violation of the law. I thought about what was at stake in this case personally, what was at stake in terms of the nation as well, and I mailed that recording voluntarily to the Wiring Commission. With a letter to the Chief Justice, July 7th, saying, dear Mr. Chief Justice, you've said that you don't believe I have a recording. You don't believe my testimony. You now have the recording. Play it for Mrs. Mark, and of course she'll eventually admit, she must admit it's her voice on there. And then I would just like a letter from you saying that you no longer have any reason to doubt the truthfulness of my statement. I wasn't asking for an apology, merely a correction. July 7th. I have not yet received an answer from the Chief Justice or any member of the Commission. Well, they called Mrs. Markham back, though, on July 23rd, and she testified. I make reference to Volume 7, page 499. And they went over and over and over. Did you say you never had a conversation with Mr. Lane or anyone on the telephone, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And she kept on saying no. They repeated all the questions they'd asked her before. And he said, do you remember giving that testimony? She said, yes, I do, et cetera. I never talked to him. I never talked to him on the phone. I never talked to anyone like that. I never said that to anybody, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then Mr. Liebler, the attorney handling the questioning, said, I would like to tell you very frankly that we have a tape recording of a conversation that purports to be a conversation between you and Mark Lane on the telephone. He said he would like to play it for her, but he did not have a tape recorder. I must confess that I am at fault here, I believe. I sent just the tape. I did not send a tape recorder. However, by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they were able to secure a tape recorder, and they played the conversation for her, and she interrupted page 501. I see you're shaking your head. Do you have something to say? And she said, I never talked to that man. Mr. Lieberman then asked, page 501, volume 7, is that not your voice on the tape? She replied, I can't tell about my voice, but that man, I never talked to no woman or no man like that. Well, they played some more of the recording for her, and she stopped them on page 503. Oh, let me just say that the recording shows that I asked her what the man looked like, and she said he was short. Yes, he was short. He was a little on the heavy side, not too heavy. His hair was a little bit bushy, no question about that. I said, what color was his shirt? She said, that I could not see. I could not see his shirt. But when she testified before the commission before then, she described the shirt in great detail, and they brought the shirt before her, and she described the color of the shirt that she had seen. Anyway, they play the tape for her, and then she breaks in again. Mr. Liebler says, now at this point you were shaking your head. What do you mean by that? This is her comment, page 503. This man I have never talked with. This lady was never on the telephone. Now ponder that thought for a moment. If that is her voice, then it is the voice of her conversation which she was involved. If it is not her voice, how does she know whether the lady was on the telephone or not? Well, it's one of the profound problems raised by Mrs. Markham's remarkable testimony. This man that called me, he told me he was Captain Fritz of Homicide. The recording begins, hello, Mrs. Markham, my name is Mark Lane. He told me he was Captain Fritz of the Police Department of City Hall, the Police Department of City Hall. Well, now, you do remember having this conversation with somebody. Yes, I do. But he told me he was from the Police Department of City Hall. Then you do remember having the conversation. Yes, but he told me he was from the Police Department of City Hall. But this man right on the tape is asking you what the police did. Did they do this? Did they get the affidavit? Do you know what I mean? Yes, I know it. And he says, what did the police do? Yes, but that man, I have never talked to that man. I talked to a man who was supposed to have been from the police department of City Hall. Do you recognize this as the voice of the man you talked to? No, it is not. This is not the same voice? No. How do you explain the fact that the woman's voice on the tape recording is your voice? I never heard that. You never heard the man's voice before? And I never heard this lady's voice before. This is the first time. Well, do you have any doubt in your mind that the lady's voice on the tape is your voice? It is my voice. But this man told me he was from the city police. Anyway, this lady never talked to me. Which lady is that? On this tape. Which lady on the tape? It was a woman talking. The lady's voice that was talking on the tape here? Yes. I thought that was your voice. It is. The commission concludes. None of this, of course, appears in the report, but in the 26 volumes, which probably no one will ever read. The commission, although I would say if this story got around, volume 7 will hit the bestseller list in America. The commission concludes, in the area of the identification of Oswald as the man who killed Officer Tippit, we conclude that Mrs. Markham is a reliable witness. Close quote. When we first became involved in this matter was solely as an attorney who wrote an article dealing with the harmful effects of pretrial publicity upon the administration of justice. Was seen by a lady who lives in Hominy, Oklahoma. She mailed it to Marguerite Oswald, who she did not know. I never knew that lady in Hominy, Oklahoma. I did not even know that there was a Hominy, Oklahoma at that time. But Marguerite Oswald read the article. The Oswald's mother called me and asked if I would represent her son's interests. She said, I know you don't take the position that my son is necessarily innocent, but you're the only one I've read who said anything that feels that there is a question that has to be asked and has to be answered. And I said, yes, I will. I'll represent your son's interest before the commission. The commission decided that Oswald was not entitled to counsel for the commission, but after that was raised, they finally reversed their position some months thereafter and said he was entitled to counsel, but they would pick the attorney. And they picked Walter Craig, president of the American Bar Association. The Chief Justice gave out a press release handout, published in every newspaper in America. He said, Walter Craig will represent and will defend the interests of Lee Harvey Oswald before the commission. Craig, however, was questioned in Phoenix, Arizona at his home by Don Carson, a staff writer for the Associated Press, and this story was then sent out by the AP. We are withdrawing the previous story about Craig representing and defending Oswald, because Craig says he will neither represent nor defend the interests of that accused assassin, and that story was never published anywhere. But the commission starts its forward saying that Oswald was represented by counsel, Mr. Craig, who could have had the opportunity to cross-examine any time he wants. And then on the back of the page, back of the book, there are hundreds and hundreds of names in the index. Every time a person is made reference to anywhere in this document, other than in the forward, his name is listed here, and there's no mention of Walter Craig because he never asked a single question which was pertinent. And we've pored over these 26 volumes. We've not read every word of them, of course. They've only been with us about a week or so now. But we've not yet been able to find a single instance where Walter Craig was ever even present at any of the questioning which took place. But the commission perpetuates the myth that Oswald was represented by counsel, although the counsel so designated himself said that he had no intention of doing that, and evidently was not even there most of the time. When we became involved in this matter, it was solely because we were concerned about the harmful effects of pretrial publicity. And had I known then what I know now, that I would have to close down my law office, go to Dallas 5 times, be questioned in front of my house by agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, discover in reading the 26 volumes that there are agents of the FBI at many of the lectures that I give who take down notes and then submit copies of what I said to the Warren Commission, followed by the FBI electronic experts saying that our telephones are tapped at home and in our office. stopped. When I traveled throughout all of Europe, Eastern, just one country, and Western, throughout almost all of Western Europe, discussing this case, there was no problem that I had with the immigration authorities anywhere. They treated us with great deference and great courtesy. The only immigration problem I had anywhere in the world was when I landed in New York City, the city of my birth, and was stopped by the American immigration authorities because my name, since I became counsel in this matter, appears in the lookout book. And I'm assigned title G15, which means when he arrives in the country, the FBI is to be notified telephonically of his presence in this country. Had I known at the outset that these were going to be the results, that the New York Post, the liberal publication, which hailed my election to the New York State Legislature 4 years ago as one of the greatest achievements of the Democratic Party in the history of New York State, if I knew that now they were going to say that Lane and Bertrand Russell are both extremists who insist that the Commission report is wrong, if I knew all of these things were going to transpire, I am not sure that I ever would have written that original article. But I can tell you this now, having come as far as we have come, and knowing now what is at stake in this matter, in terms of the total suppression of the facts by the Commission, the refusal of the media to permit that which is taking place in every single country of the world, with the exception of this our own country, a dialogue on what took place in Dallas on November 22nd. There has not been a single network radio or television program, now in more than a year, challenging any single aspect of the Warren Commission report or of the case against Oswald. Not one, and that cannot be said for any other country of the world other than the United States. Knowing now what is at stake here in terms of the position taken by the establishment in suppressing discussion, in presenting a $1 million, 888-page tranquilizer to the American people, we are not going to leave this matter, neither am I nor those who are active with us in the Citizens Committee at various college campuses throughout America or in various cities throughout America, until such time, no matter what the difficulties and no matter what the obstacles, until such time as the American people secure that to which we are entitled in a free, open, and democratic society, and that is some intelligible answers to the thus far unanswered questions of Dallas on November 22nd. Thank you.
We'll have time for a brief question period. I will monitor and relay the questions if it's acceptable to Mr. Lane, because they are sometimes difficult to hear. Before we do this, I'd like to make one announcement. We are, I should say not we, but the representatives of SLC and the Graduate Students Association will hold open hearings today and tomorrow in the old TV room on the A level of this building. These are the Joint Committee on Free Speech of GSA and SLC, and this is to provide suggestions at the request of the Chancellor that he may use in implementing the regental policies on use of university facilities. Okay, let's start with questions right here in front.
If you say the Commission reported a fraud, do you have any idea what the motives might be behind this Council of 7 of the most distinguished Americans around?
Question is,
Why would they fraud us?
if the report is a fraud, what would the motive for fraud be?
Well, that then moves us into the area, of course, of speculation and conjecture, which is an area, I think, which has been preempted completely by the Warren Commission. And And I have made it a practice from the very beginning in terms of our involvement in this matter to secure factual information, to present it as accurately as we can, and to stay entirely out of the area of analyzing anyone's motives or trying to move at all into the area of speculation, and we're going to do that. And I think that each person must have faith not in some leadership. You made reference to the 7 most distinguished men on this commission. I think if you are familiar with all the backgrounds of all 7 of the members of the commission, you may reach a different conclusion, that they are the 7 most distinguished men in America. Yeah, some of the distinguished men. I think the Chief Justice is a distinguished man, and I think that there are a number of persons on the commission who have no background, no training. The vast majority of the members of the commission, of course, 5 of the 7, have no judicial background whatsoever. They are political appointees. One is the whip of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is represented by 2 Southern Democrats. You know, there's no Northern Democrat on the 7-man commission. In fact, the commission is made up of 5 Republicans and 2 Southern Democrats. And although the New York Times refers to this as a cross-section of the American people, I'm inclined to think that the last election indicated that is not an accurate designation. But the fact is, there's not a single Kennedy Democrat on the 7-man commission. I think that's a rather serious oversight. But in terms of their motivation, I don't know. I think this is a question which must be directed to them.
Yes, right here in the UCLA.
Okay, you mentioned that 5 out of the 7 people of the commission had no political background. How many? Well, okay.
All right, here in the second row.
I was wondering, are there any acoustical tests of any sort conducted concerning the possibility of the shot by a
Yeah, well, the question of the acoustics, have there been acoustical tests conducted to determine whether or not if a shot was fired from the book depository building, it might echo from behind there? No, there have not been. The commission declined a suggestion that such tests be conducted, unfortunately. We thought of doing this ourselves, but the idea of setting off any explosions in the Dallas area without the permission of the authorities under the circumstances was a risk which we decided not to undertake. But if you look at the area, of course, you can't see the height of the buildings from the crude drawing which I presented, but there are in the commission report some pictures of this general vicinity. There are huge buildings here, and that book depository building tower is 7 stories high, and these are even taller. After that, it's wide open country. It's grass, it's farmland. That wooden fence is only 4.5 feet high. The concrete facade is only about a little bit higher than that, and it is up on a little grassy knoll. It would seem very difficult to believe, although this is not my field, and we've not conducted the experiments which the commission should have conducted, but it seems doubtful that a shot fired from this large area, which forms an L of concrete and steel, would reverberate off of a very low wooden fence area.
What attempts have been made to publish your findings and have them distributed widely and cheaply throughout the United States?
Well, of course, the best way to publish our findings is to discuss them through the media, which is probably why it is not permitted for us to discuss these things on the media. In fact, the Les Crane show, which is, I think Mr. Crane calls himself Mr. Controversy, found this discussion much too controversial. Although Crane himself did want to have a discussion, he invited me to debate Melvin Belli on the program regarding the Warren Commission report, and the ABC TV legal department took the position that there could be no such debate. We have an invitation from Mr. Crane, but it was canceled by the legal department of ABC TV on the grounds that it was not permitted to have such a debate at this time. They suggested, however, that Les Crane arrange a different debate. Melvin Belli, a very able, flamboyant attorney, who has some knowledge of the case, was to debate instead Marguerite Oswald, Lee Oswald's mother. And that's the way the debate was carried on the Les Crane show. And I asked Mr. Crane why it was that that debate was permitted. He said, well, I'll tell you, we have a recording of Mr. Crane's explanation. He said, I'll tell you, Mark, the problem is that ABC TV legal department told me that they don't want you on. You have, you got the facts and the affidavits and the evidence, and they felt that that should not be presented. But what we are doing, we're writing a book which will be published in the spring, and hopefully there will be a documentary movie. I don't know where it will be shown, possibly on the college campuses, maybe even someplace else.
When Oswald was captured on site, did he receive possession of his gun?
I don't know whether or not Oswald did have a pistol in his possession when he was arrested. The only statements we have are from the police officers who arrested him. There were 14 persons in the theater when Oswald was arrested who perhaps could have given, other than police officers, who perhaps could have given an answer to that question, but the commission refused to call them. Well, if the question is if the Italian carbine was utilized on November 22nd, how could it have been used accurately from behind the fence if it could not have been used from the book depository building? It is not my position that the Italian carbine was used. It is the Dallas police position that the German Mauser became an Italian carbine, and it in turn became the assassination weapon. The witnesses at the scene, including Governor Connolly and other agents of the United States Secret Service, said they believed that more than one person was firing, or that a weapon, an automatic weapon, was used, because everyone agrees that the rhythm of the shots was very much like this. Those two, the second and third shots, coming so closely, and the commission finds that that weapon requires an interval of 2.3 seconds between firing shots. Therefore, I think most experts who have any knowledge of weapons would agree that more than one weapon was utilized in firing on the president and Governor Connolly.
What did the
Well, you partially answered my question. We had previously mentioned Governor Connolly's wound, and I found it, when I read it, I think it would be rather difficult for him to receive the wound that he did with a bullet lodged in his thigh if he were shot from the front. And another thing, you never mentioned, I read the autopsy report in the Warren Commission, and it said that there was a hole in the back of Hustington's back that figured one of the bullet entered through.
Right. Well, let's talk about both then.
You never mentioned that.
Yes. Well, there's a lot I haven't mentioned. There's an 888-page report. I'll repeat the question. You said that there are some things I have not mentioned, including the hole which the autopsy said was in the president's back, and the fact that if the bullet ended up in Governor Connolly's thigh, it very likely could not have been fired from the front. Well, there is much that I have not mentioned, of course. If I thought I could say it all in one lecture, I probably would not be writing a book about the case. And I think that many, many volumes will be required to give any serious analysis to the commission report. The commission took 888 pages to condense inaccurately the testimony before them, so there's a vast amount of number of areas that we have not commented upon at all, but I'll be happy to as the questions are raised. The wound in the president's back was one which was discovered rather late. Dr. Kemp Clark said he examined the president's back. He felt the entire back all the way up to the top of the neck. He's the doctor at the Parkland Hospital and did not discover any wound there at all. That wound was discovered only during the autopsy, and that may be a clue as to why it is impossible for anyone ever to secure a picture of the president or an x-ray. Now, while Dr. Clark said that the physicians at Parkland did not turn the president over so that his back was visible, he also said that he examined his back with his hand and felt no wound at all. Now, in terms of the bullet which struck Governor Connolly, this raises some very serious questions. We know one bullet struck the concrete. We know that one bullet struck the president. We know one bullet struck the governor, and we know another bullet struck the president. That's 4 bullets. No matter how you count it, that's 4 bullets. The commission, however, is faced with the serious dilemma of explaining those 4 bullets and also explaining that only 3 shots were fired, since the rifle is physically incapable of discharging 4 shots even without aiming in a period of 6 seconds. So the commission reaches this conclusion, that the bullet which was fired by Oswald from behind struck the president in the back, exited through the throat, and went on to hit Governor Connolly. In other words, that one bullet was pressed into service for double duty that day, explaining how there could be 4 wounds, including one in the curb, or 3 wounds and a mark on the curb, and still only 3 shots fired. This raises, however, some very serious questions. First of all, the ballistics report released by the FBI December 17th, stated that the 2 bullets which hit the president came from Oswald's rifle, but the 1 bullet which hit the governor was so badly smashed they could never tell its origin. Now we find out that one of the bullets which hit the president went through him and hit the governor. So when it was taken from the governor, was it so badly smashed they could never tell its origin? Or because it hit the president, was it certain to be the bullet which came from Oswald's rifle? That's the first problem which the authorities found themselves confronted with. But more serious than that, perhaps, is Governor Connolly's own testimony. He says, the first shot was fired, I heard it, turned to my right, quickly started to turn to the left, and I was hit in the back by a bullet which tore through his back, his chest, wrist, and then in his thigh. Governor Connolly said, there is no question in my mind. I was not struck by the first bullet. He said, I heard that sound, and then as I started to turn, I felt the impact, and I know that a bullet travels more quickly than does the sound. So I know it. Now, Mrs. Connolly testified much the same fashion. She said she was seated alongside of her husband. She heard the shot, turned around, and saw the president grasping his throat with both hands, and his face went blank, and she said, I knew he was terribly hurt. Then she said, John, her husband on her right, turned to his right to look, couldn't see, then turned to his left, and then he was hit. In other words, the bullet struck the president in the back, emerged from the throat, and held there in midair for approximately 1.5 seconds while the governor turned first to the right and then to the left and proceeded on through him according to the commission report. Now, even more serious than that is if that bullet came from the back. According to the FBI analysis of the frames, there are a whole series of frames taken from that motion picture, and each frame takes an 1/18 of a second, according to the commission. So there are 18 frames per second, and the very last time that the bullet could have struck the president, the very last time the bullet could have struck the president would be at the most 1 1/2 seconds after the first bullet hit the president, according to the commission and according to the FBI. In other words, if the bullet which hit the governor is not the same bullet which hit the president, and it was fired at the most 1 1/2 seconds after the bullet was fired which hit the president, then there had to be another assassin involved, even if Oswald was one of them, and there's no evidence that he was at all involved. But even if he was, there would have to be another one, because the commission finds it takes 2.3 seconds to get off a shot. So the whole commission case rests upon the fact that the bullet which hit the president went through the president and hit the governor, and that is contradicted first by the FBI's own analysis of the ballistics. Secondly, it is contradicted by Governor Connolly's statement. Thirdly, it is contradicted by Mrs. Connolly's statement. And lastly, it is contradicted by the visual evidence in terms of the examination of the film. Therefore, it seems to me somewhat disingenuous for the commission, knowing that their whole case is predicated upon the fact that Governor Connolly is wrong, Mrs. Connolly is wrong, and the film is wrong, to state in conclusion number 3, quote, although it is not necessary to any essential findings of the commission to determine just which shot hit Governor Connolly. There's very persuasive evidence that it was the same one which hit the president, they go on to say. Not only is it essential to the findings, the whole case against anyone as a lone assassin goes out the window if the bullet which hit the president did not hit the governor. And here we have Governor Connolly, Mrs. Connolly, and the film stating that it was indeed a different bullet. The first report that came out was that a Secret Service agent was killed besides Officer Tippett. There was, of course, inaccurate reporting during the chaos which took place there, and I don't rely upon any newspaper accounts other than the quotations of the authorities who made those comments to very reputable reporters, to more than one reporter, or who made them on radio and television where we can hear them and see them actually saying it. And it could have been just an error. I don't know. I know there was the first statement that a Secret Service agent was killed. It was a difficult area for us to investigate. All we can do is write a letter to the Secret Service and ask them, and I'm not sure that would bring about the factual answer.
I think we'll take 2 more questions. Just stood up there.
The primary case is built up against you and your argument. It revolves, I think, around Bobby Kennedy, the family as a whole. Why have he had any shadow of a doubt in his mind? Has he not done anything? And
Well,
this goes into the area of conjecture again.
yes, well, I don't think that the position taken by Robert Kennedy is in any way related to the evidence which I've been discussing today. The commission report is a fraud from the first cover to the last cover. It cannot be defended by anyone who reads it and gives any cursory attention at all to the documents before the commission. We're asked then to have faith in Robert Kennedy, as we've been asked all along to have faith in Earl Warren. I think that Bertrand Russell answered that proposition perhaps 10 years ago. In his writings, he said, "We're asked to have faith in those areas only where there is absolutely no evidence. No one asks us to have faith that 2 and 2 are 4, or that the earth is round. We're only asked to have faith when we have no evidence to prove that something is so." I don't know what Robert Kennedy's position is on the matter. There are many political considerations, perhaps, which address themselves to the senator from New York State. I have not the faintest idea what his thinking is. I do know that Mrs. Kennedy, Jacqueline Kennedy, is not satisfied with the Warren Commission report. We know that she has said that the American people have never been given all of the facts in this case. For that reason, she has retained an author named William Manchester to conduct an investigation, which he is now conducting in Dallas, and to write a book on her behalf. So, as she said, the American people for the first time will know what actually took place in Dallas on November 22nd. While I'm very much looking forward to the publication of Jacqueline Kennedy's book, fact remains that each and every individual in a democratic society has an obligation imposed upon him if he wishes to function fully in such a society. And that is to examine factual information which is important and to have faith in no one other than his own ability, to have faith in his own reasoning powers, to read and to reach his own conclusion. I think that's the whole purpose of education, so that those may secure information not through the use of faith, but through the use of an objective analysis of the facts.
And this will be the last question right over here.
Police stated that several people saw some man throw something into the bushes behind the fence. Was there ever a search made if there was?
Well, in reference to the throwing of something into the bushes, the sole statement that we have, and we've not yet been able to read all of the testimony, but the sole statement that we have is Deputy Constable Weitzman's statement that a railroad yardman standing behind the fence said that he thought he saw someone throw something into the bushes. Now, there were police officers all over the place behind the bushes. If they discovered anything, we don't know. Evidently, they have not reported to the commission that they found anything there at all. Thank you very much.
Okay, that.